The Pole of Inaccessibility in Antarctica. If you pick the point on a map of Antarctica that is farthest from any coastline and somehow make your way there, the first thing you would see stepping out onto the ice is Lenin's head sticking out of the snow. No body, no pedestal, just a head. It is not an art installation, and it is not somebody's joke. It is all that remains above the surface of a Soviet research station, built here in 1958 and later abandoned. The building disappeared under the snow within a few years. The head, mounted on the roof, sank more slowly, and in the end, it outlasted everything else. The place is called the Pole of Inaccessibility, and it deserves far more attention than it gets. When most people hear the word pole in connection with Antarctica, they think of one specific place, 90 degrees south latitude, the point where all the meridians meet. The place Amundsen and Scott raced to reach in 1911 and 1912. But that is only one of several very real poles on the continent. The magnetic pole has a life of its own and shifts a little every year without asking cartographers for permission. The cold pole is the area around Vostok Station, where in 1983 a temperature of minus 128.6 degrees Fahrenheit was recorded. At that temperature, the moisture in your breath can freeze almost instantly. Diesel fuel turns into gel, and exposed skin can suffer frostbite in seconds. And then there is a fourth pole, the one almost nobody talks about. It is defined by neither physics nor astronomy, only geometry. If you take a map of Antarctica and find the point that is farthest from the coast in every direction at once, that is the Pole of Inaccessibility. According to Soviet calculations from 1958, its coordinates are 82 degrees 6 minutes south, 54 degrees 58 minutes east, on the East Antarctic Plateau. The nearest coastline is more than 620 miles away. That is the kind of distance that is hard to feel just by hearing the number. So here is a better comparison. From New York City to Pittsburgh is about 370 miles, and that already feels like a serious trip. Here it is nearly twice that. And that only gets you to the edge of the ice, where the ocean begins beyond it. There is nowhere farther. This is quite literally the point farthest from open water anywhere on the southern continent. It is worth pointing out that the very idea of a coastline in Antarctica is more complicated than it sounds. Much of the continent is ringed by ice shelves, enormous floating slabs of ice that extend dozens or even hundreds of miles out into the sea beyond the solid land beneath them. If you count the outer edge of those shelves as the coast, the pole ends up in one place. If you use the grounding line, where the ice actually lifts off the bedrock and begins to float, it ends up somewhere else. The Soviet expedition of 1958 used the maps available at the time, and those were later refined and corrected with satellite data, so modern calculations place the points somewhat differently. Even so, the Soviet coordinates are still treated as the classic ones. That is where people reached first, and that is the place most people mean when they talk about the Pole of Inaccessibility. Why Soviet polar explorers went there at all, and why they did it in 1958 is actually pretty simple, because by then, the Americans had already claimed the South Geographic Pole. In November 1956, the United States opened Amundsen Scott Station, planting its flag on the most symbolic point on the Antarctic map, and beating every other contender to it. It was a clear message in the middle of the Cold War. We can get anywhere. The International Geophysical Year was underway, a massive scientific effort that ran from 1957 to 1958 and involved 67 countries. In Antarctica, it meant several nations working at once from different stations across the continent. Officially, it was scientific cooperation. In practice, it was also a race for geographic symbols. In October 1957, the Soviet Union launched the first satellite. In December of that same year, it opened Vostok Station in one of the coldest places on the continent. One unclaimed point still remained, the Pole of Inaccessibility, a place no one had ever reached before. Soviet scientific ambition and political logic met at exactly the same spot, and the Third Soviet Antarctic Expedition was given its assignment. On December 14, 1958, an overland tractor sled team of 18 men reached the target. Their vehicles were Kharkov-Chanka tractors, massive machines weighing about 39 tons, designed specifically for Antarctic conditions at the Kharkiv tractor plant. They were, in effect, mobile living and working stations on tracks. Inside each one were bunks, a kitchen, scientific instruments, and repair equipment. The crew slept, ate, and worked inside those metal shells, stepping outside only when absolutely necessary, and only in full gear. At minus 58 degrees Fahrenheit, any mechanical problem out in the open stopped being a technical inconvenience and became a survival issue. Bare metal burns your hands like something red hot, only in reverse, and breathing through an unprotected mouth can injure your airways within minutes. The trip from the coastal Mirny base took about 2 weeks of continuous travel. Navigation deep in the Antarctic interior is a story in itself. A magnetic compass becomes unreliable at these latitudes because of the nearby magnetic pole, so the polar explorers navigated by solar, azimuth, and astronomical observations, much the way Amundsen had in 1911, only now with tracked vehicles and radio contact with the coastal base. The plateau itself looks so empty that the whole idea of a landmark starts to lose meaning. It is a perfectly flat white surface stretching to the horizon in every direction, with no ridges, no shadows, no dark spots, nothing. In blizzard conditions, visibility drops to just a few yards. In clear weather, the sun hangs above the horizon around the clock. December in Antarctica is continuous daylight, and it creates an endless white glare that can leave you snowblind within hours without proper eye protection. The surface reflects more than 80% of the sun's radiation, which creates one more strange contradiction of the place. At 50 below, an exposed face can be freezing and getting sunburned at the same time. When the expedition arrived at the coordinates, they set up a small station there. During 12 days on site, the team carried out a full program of scientific work, meteorological observations, atmospheric sounding, and geophysical measurements. On the roof of the main building, they installed a bust of Lenin facing toward Moscow. The gesture was both a political symbol and a practical marker. A Soviet expedition reached a point that could, without exaggeration, be called one of the hardest places on Earth to reach. Then the expedition packed up and headed back to the coast, leaving behind no permanent staff. The station was abandoned as it stood, with equipment, supplies, and the bust still on the roof. After that, Antarctica took over. The East Antarctic Plateau accumulates snowfall slowly, only a few inches a year, but relentlessly. The snow does not melt. Even in summer, it is too cold for that. Layer by layer, it compresses under its own weight, turning into firn and then into ice, and everything left on the surface begins to sink, slowly and steadily, with no hurry at all. The buildings of the Soviet station started disappearing into the snow within the first few years after they were built. Windows were buried, doors ended up below surface level, structures warped under the pressure of the growing snowpack. Nobody came back to see what was happening. The station had been abandoned, and officially, no one cared what became of it. Gradually, the only thing left above the surface was the highest point of all, the bust on the roof. The building kept sinking, and the head slowly dropped closer and closer to snow level. By the end of the 20th century, that was all that remained sticking out of the white plain. No body, no pedestal, just a head wearing the utterly calm expression of a man buried up to the neck in the most isolated place on Earth. No one returned for 50 years. For half a century, the Pole of Inaccessibility existed on its own. Snow, wind, cold, and Lenin's head above the surface. No country and no private expedition considered the place important enough to justify the enormous cost of organizing a journey there. The distance from any Antarctic base is hundreds of miles across the plateau. Every extra mile means more fuel, more risk, and more money. There is record-setting romance to it, but almost no practical payoff. In January 2007, a British team of 4 led by Henry Cookson reached the Pole of Inaccessibility, the first to do so in 49 years since the Soviet expedition of 1958. They traveled on skis with kites, using Antarctica's steady winds as their driving force. That method allows people to cover huge distances much faster than hauling sleds on foot, though it demands its own set of skills and a good deal of luck with the weather. When they reached the right coordinates and looked around, they found exactly what the Soviet descriptions from half a century earlier said should be there. Lenin's head rising from the snow, and nothing else for miles around. The team planted its own flag beside it, documented the visit, took photographs, and moved on. It was a stop that lasted only a few hours, just long enough to confirm that, yes, it was all exactly as described. After 2007, the pole was reached a few more times, mostly by small athletic expeditions, for whom getting to extremely inaccessible places was the whole point. All of them reported the same thing. Lenin was still there. Today, the Pole of Inaccessibility draws scientific attention for a reason far more interesting than any record. The East Antarctic Plateau is considered one of the most promising places on Earth for drilling ultra-deep ice cores. Ice has built up here layer by layer for millions of years, and each layer contains tiny bubbles of air from the time that snow originally fell. Drilling those cores is, quite literally, reading Earth's atmospheric archive. A cylinder of ice brought up from deep below is opened in a lab, the trapped bubbles are analyzed, and scientists get direct evidence of the atmosphere, temperatures, and greenhouse gases of the distant past. These are not indirect clues or computer models. This is actual air, sealed by nature in ice long before human beings ever appeared. The current record is about 800,000 years. That is how far back the deepest Antarctic ice cores drilled so far can reach. Scientists are convinced, however, that in certain parts of the eastern plateau, where snow accumulates especially slowly and the layers are extremely thin, there must be ice 1.5 million years old, or even older. Ice like that could answer major questions about the era before our current climate cycles, about how exactly the planet shifted between ice ages back when Homo sapiens did not yet exist as a species. Several international programs, including the Million-Year Ice Core Project, are searching for the best drilling sites in this very part of the eastern plateau, the same region Soviet tractors crossed by solar azimuth in December 1958. Beyond the ice itself, the plateau hides a landscape that has only been reconstructed in broad outline from airborne radar surveys. The region is thought to contain subglacial lakes, sealed bodies of water cut off from the atmosphere for millions of years. Whether they contain life remains an open question. Ecosystems like that, existing at the very edge of habitability, are of interest not only to biologists, but also to scientists searching for life on other worlds, on moons like Europa or Enceladus, where similar conditions may exist beneath thick shells of ice. Antarctica is the least explored continent on Earth, and the Pole of Inaccessibility is the least explored point in that already little-known place. We live in an age when anyone with a phone in their pocket can pull up live street views from Tokyo or Buenos Aires in seconds. Yet there is still a place on this same planet that only a handful of people have ever reached. A place with no road, no regular route, and no permanent human presence. And right there, at the very center of that isolation, a man's head still sticks out of the snow. A man whose entire idea was that history moves in the direction of progress. Maybe it does. But at this particular point, history seems to be moving mostly in the direction of deeper and deeper burial in ice, slowly, steadily, and without the slightest emotion. Why climb Everest? Because it is the highest point. Why go to the moon? Because we can. Human beings have always pushed into places that offered no practical reason to go, and the Pole of Inaccessibility belongs to that same category. Lenin's bust is no longer really an ideological symbol. It has become something else, a monument to the simple fact that we made it even here. And beneath this ice, it turns out, lies something more important than any symbol at all. 1.5 million years of the planet's atmospheric history, still waiting to be read. So the most useless place on Earth may end up being one of the most important. Just not right away.